In the modern landscape of horror, the concept of the final girl, a lone survivor who overcomes a villain's reign of terror, has become a widely accepted and occasionally satirized trope. The notion of an innocent girl, often on the outside of a social clique and forced to overcome the adversity not only of her friend group, but of a deadly entity, is as much part of the genre landscape as mass killers and cabins in the woods. In fact, the theme is so widely implemented in contemporary horror beats that movies like Scream and the recent Final Girls have utilized their meta qualities to comment, critique, and dissect this time-honored hallmark. But where does the notion of the final girl within the confines of the genre come from? Greetings and welcome to the History of Fright. I'm your host, Michael Verratti, and this week is all about those ladies who faced down the forces of darkness and lived to tell the tale. Since the beginning, horror has seen its fair share of stories featuring female leads being plagued by both forces sinister and otherworldly. From Mina Harker in Bram Stoker's Dracula to Lila Crane in Hitchcock's Psycho, female-driven plotlines have long driven the genre. In some cases, when horror is at its very best, the mechanism is a tool for strong social commentary, subverting power structure and gender roles, and, like all things, at its weakest, can be a mechanism of lazy patriarchal reinforcement. And while each of these films merits dissection due to their ability to reveal truths about the social and cultural attitudes of when they were made, the actual concept of what we consider the final girl is a lot more recent than most people realize. The term first came to prominence when Carol Clover, a respected film studies professor, published a book titled Men, Women, and Chainsaws: Gender in the Modern Horror Film, which quickly became a cornerstone work in the academic dissection of fright flicks. As noted, the trope of a lone survivor girl had long been a standard of fright films, especially with regard to slashers, but it was Clover who finally gave the phenomenon a name. Specifically focusing on slasher films of the 70s and 80s, Clover observed time and again certain behaviors and representations of the notion. A girl, often separated from her friends, forced to survive and ultimately defeat an agent of evil. However, Clover's study went beyond the mere recognition that such a trope existed and examined the details of why. By looking at early proto-slashers like John Carpenter's Halloween and Bob Clark's Black Christmas, and tracking them through the 80s slasher heyday of Friday the 13th, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and the like, Clover identified certain characteristics that many of these women shared. Most frequently, Clover noted the virgin status or sexual unavailability of these characters, and it became a wildly held belief that this was to represent innocence in the face of the wicked. In fact, the notion that only a virgin can beat the killer became so widely tied to the genre, it was even famously mentioned as one of the rules of horror described in Wes Craven's Scream.
Number one, you can never have sex.
However, the truth of the matter is that the virginal status of such characters often has very little to do with sexual purity, innocence, or cultural mores. Many of the heroines of 80s slashers are not virgins and in fact have agency over themselves and their bodies. In the first Friday the 13th, Alice is an adult woman very much in control of her life and her sexuality, and it is she, with strength and agency, who ultimately survives the night. What Clover is talking about when putting the virginal status on display is more about otherness than it is about promiscuity. As we've mentioned in prior episodes, the villains of horror movies often represent otherness or outsider status. What we haven't had a chance to discuss yet is that frequently, the heroes of horror movies do too. But ultimately, this makes sense. It's the best kind of dramatic storytelling, presenting two sides of a coin. Take, for example, the original Halloween. In that film, the character of Laurie, played by Jamie Lee Curtis, is still coming into her own. She's not as self-assured as her more sexual and rambunctious friends, and much is made about the fact that she's still finding herself. In this case, her virgin status isn't about innocence, it's about what makes her feel separate from the group. It gives Laurie a sense of otherness that we can relate to and sympathize with. Laurie is on the outside of the world she lives in, and in his way, so is Michael Myers. So when the two finally collide, not only is it a matter of good versus evil and hero versus villain, but also Laurie confronting a world that makes her feel like an outsider. You see, final girls ultimately are the characters that serve as our window into the world of the story. They are often othered or removed enough that we feel a kinship or connection to them because they frequently, in their way, represent what makes us feel other about ourselves. It is then that we have someone to root for, because if they overcome their demons, there's a chance we can overcome ours. Characters like Ellen Ripley, Nancy Thompson, Sally Hardesty, Sarah Connor, and many more have taken us to the brink of a nightmare and shown us through genre allegory that it is possible to fight back. And while there is criticism to be had, some by Carol Clover herself, that the genre often veers into the territory of sadistic voyeurism by placing these characters into a victimized situation before they can fight back, more modern examples have sought to correct this by leaning more into the feminist and personal empowerment mindsets. Originally created by Joss Whedon as the critique of the standard 80s final girl, Buffy the Vampire Slayer has pop culturally become a powerful icon and is widely viewed as one of the most celebrated female heroes in the zeitgeist. Even Laurie Strode, once unwillingly thrust into a nightmarish Halloween night, got a chance to reclaim her agency with appearances in 1998's Halloween H2O and this year's newly revived Halloween by taking her survivor status, turning the tables on evil, and fighting back her way. Ultimately, in a genre of monsters and mayhem, it is the final girls who should have our hearts, because they represent us and our own battles with fear. More so, through their heightened situations, they put on display the tenacity of the human spirit and show that if we look within, we can overcome anything. So, while occasionally problematic in presentation when left in the wrong hands, Final Girls can quite often represent the best of what this genre has to offer, social commentary wrapped up in a message of personal empowerment. Slashers, I'm putting you on notice, because these sisters are doing it for themselves. Until next time. Hey everyone, thanks for watching History of Fright. We will be back next week with more spooky content. For more horror stuff, go follow our friends at Dread Central and check out my podcast, Dead for Filth, and don't forget to follow Gamma Ray across the web.